and it's important that you look after the health of your employees or make sure they are looking after themselves. And also importantly is the display screen equipment assessment. So have they got suitable accommodation at home where they can work? Have they got suitable desks, seating, lighting, etc.? So to make sure that you're looking at all those areas where you have got people working at home. And some of the key areas from an HR perspective, as Julie has alluded to, is looking at whether you need to change contracts of employment, how you manage new hires and induction, and also about keeping your employees motivated and engaged when they're not in the office. And we'll cover this in more detail. And finally, I'll be looking at employee wellbeing and how to notice the signs of stress maybe with people working from home. So what I'll say here is communicate. You cannot stress the importance enough of keeping in communication with your people at home. Regular team meetings, you want to encourage interaction between teams. Do you use suitable platform, Microsoft Teams, for example? And also ensuring your managers are trained and understand how to spot those signs of stress. So looking at the onboarding and induction for new staff, so I think it's very important where you've got a mixture of people working from different locations. You need to be clear on how you are managing those new staff, and are the people in the office or are the people available to buddy up with them or manage them through that program. So do you set a full induction program? And this is not just for remote workers. I mean, obviously you could have this in place anyway for other members of staff, but do you have a full induction program? Do they know what they need to achieve during those first few months with you? Because it's the first few months that you need to create that good impression of the organisation and the professionalism. You might have a program that ensures that they are introduced to all key members of staff. They might spend 15, 20 minutes with each manager of the department to understand how each department fits in with the overall organisation. Do you assign buddies to people? So again, if you haven't got all the key people in the office, do you therefore assign a buddy? That buddy may well be remotely, but it's someone that they can go to if they have questions that they don't necessarily want to ask their manager. And where you have that agile working arrangement, do you have sufficient training and induction for the people that are working maybe more the core hours to help those members of staff integrate into the business and understand what they need to do? You might need to change some of the working arrangements. So where you've got a blended approach and you're allowing people to work from home a couple of or 2 or 3 days a week, then you need to ensure that during that induction period, they're in the office slightly more because they might need to manage a new member of staff. So, and it's also important during the induction that you communicate and set milestones for them. So if you have probationary periods, do the employees know what's expected of them during that probation period? So if they don't meet those expectations and you suddenly decide the probation period they haven't succeeded, do they know why? So have you set those milestones? What are you therefore measuring against as part of that 3 or 6 month probation? And during that probation period, make sure that you have those regular reviews and one-to-ones, especially if you're not seeing them in the office each day. So there are some positives from working from home. I hope you can read those because they're strange colours. But yeah, there are some positives. Now I've got less distractions and less interruptions with a few exclamation marks, because obviously that can be a negative as well for some people working from home. But yeah, sometimes you've got the comfy shoes, you have the Zoom outfit that I've seen a lot of people wear. You don't have that daily commute. So there are a few positives there, which I won't go through all of them, but you can see them on the screen. And then moving on to some of the negatives. Now, again, I've got in there more distractions, more interruptions, because it depends on people's working arrangements as to whether they do have more interruptions when they are working from home. But some of the key ones there are those feelings of isolation. And I'm sure a lot of you on the call today have probably been working from home a lot of this time. And you can know how sometimes you can feel slightly remote from the rest of the team and slightly isolated. It just depends on people's circumstances. So there is some risks there, and the less feedback, less interaction, which is where people can feel more isolated. So now I'm going to look in the next few slides at setting expectations, the communication and strategy to reduce the stress and anxiety. So starting with setting expectations. So if you are looking at a blended approach or the agile or dynamic or whatever approach you're looking at, you may want to do it for a trial period and see how things are working. And it may be quite different to have the mixtures of people when you've got some in the office and some not in the office. So as Julie has alluded to earlier with the various guises of dynamic and agile, are their hours the same or is there that flexibility? Or you've gone through a statutory flexibility flexible working approach. And also, you need to set expectations in terms of childcare. And I've spoken to quite a few clients that they've got people working from home and they're actually using it to look after the children, which is not always conducive with trying to work and sit in meetings. And that's where the more flexible approach or the dynamic approach may work, where they choose the hours that they want to work. So just make sure that you're clear in what you're setting, the expectations. Is the workload the same? Are the duties the same? Has your business changed during COVID? And do some of the job roles need to be adapted? If they don't have access to certain materials that they would have had if they're in the office, do you need to change those duties around? So just think about the sort of job descriptions and the duties and responsibilities those staff may have. So be very clear on the expectations of communication. So if they're working from home and they're working the same hours as the people in the office, do they get involved in some of those meetings online? Are you expecting to go in the office for those meetings? Do you log on and have chat function working in Teams? Do you have the team channels going? So just be clear on how you're expecting people to communicate. And that works both ways. So the people in the office, making sure they're communicating with the people that are working remotely. So if you've got updates on certain clients or certain cases or certain projects, do you have mechanisms where they can see what's going on and what's been updated? Do they have suitable equipment at home and do they have access to that equipment? And also, is the GDPR or data protection in place for that as well? Be clear on the meetings that they're expected to attend and also setting those goals and objectives and how you record in those and how they be monitored. So it may be that you need to look at your performance management process to ensure that they're recording the objectives and how you're monitoring some of those when people are working from home. And also regularly check in with employees. Do they need extra support? And through your performance management process, like you would with anyone in the office, making sure they've got that sense of purpose and they still realise that they're contributing to the business. Keep that encouragement and praise going, which I'm sure you do all the time. But remember the people that are remote working, if a project has gone particularly well, remember to praise those people that you might not be seeing face to face. Back to the group meetings, make sure that they're involved in those. And private chats and one-to-one meetings, it's important. And you may already have one-to-one meetings as part of your performance management process, but more importantly, have those meetings with the employees when they're working from home. And that's when you can do your check-in. And the more regular you meet with these people online or virtually, the more you're likely to pick up on any changes in behaviour from one day to the next, or you notice a change in behaviour, you notice how the output is not as good. So again, those regular, the more contact you have, because if you know when you see everybody in the office, you can normally detect where people are not probably on top form. It's more difficult to do that when you've got people working remotely. And treat them as you would with any other person that's working in the office. And be as honest and open with your communication as you can. And try and encourage them and do those probing questions to encourage them to tell you of any concerns. You may have a one-to-one template that they fill out beforehand. Have you got any concerns? Have you got any issues? That they may want to put on a form ready to prepare you to have that meeting with them. And deal promptly with any concerns that they may have. Don't wait until you've got a next catch up in the diary. It's important to try and nip those things in the bud as quickly as you can, and to avoid and try and do it face to face virtually if you can, rather than just ping an email, because emails, as you know, can probably be misconstrued at times, and it's important to try and have that dialogue with them. And also look at where you've got relevant external support for employees on an intranet. Do you have an employee assistance program, for example? Do you have mental health first aiders? Do they know how to contact those people? And do you have a medical insurance that allows people to make contact regarding mental health issues? And do they have information for support services outside of your organisation, like the Samaritans, for example? And try and encourage your employees to look after themselves, take regular breaks. You find, and I've spoken to many clients that've got this sort of presenteeism where they feel they've got to be online constantly. And because their computer may be in the same room as their lounge or their other members of the family, they feel that they still log on in the evening and check emails. Try and, if they're not working that dynamic arrangement where they can log on at different times, make sure that they're not trying to overwork and impress and look being online, just to try and impress you as a manager, because that can be where they don't get that work-life balance. One of the advantages from working home should be a work-life balance, but sometimes it actually has a detrimental effect where you've got people that are constantly online and trying to check on emails, etc. So you might want to encourage them to take those breaks, take walks at lunchtime, drink plenty of fluids. You might want to do, I know companies that are doing like team exercise. They've got walking, how many steps does a team do in a week, for example. And those sorts of things are quite good to have a bit of sort of team camaraderie, and it encourages people to take those breaks and take that exercise. And if you're organising sort of impromptu social events, make sure you're including people that are not necessarily your face-to-face within the office. Now look at, and as I mentioned earlier, the more times that you meet with your manager, you meet with your staff, or you have those one-to-ones, the more you're likely to recognise those signs and symptoms of problems that are maybe manifesting themselves. They might be less engaged with the work that they're doing. They might be distancing themselves more from the team. They're not engaging in chats on your team, Microsoft Teams, for example. They're showing a lack of interest. Physically and mentally, they might not be taking as much care of themselves. They might not be getting involved in the walking challenges that you might be putting out there. But displaying some of those symptoms you might see when you're talking to them. So make sure you're keeping in regular contact, and you'd sort of talk about the issues, or encourage them to talk about the issues, or talk to somebody externally or independent of you if they need to. Hopefully you won't see this significant alcohol increase when you're in meetings, but you never know what's in those bottles when they're slurping. And then also, now moving on to those strategies of managing stress and anxiety. So when you're talking to employees, you might want to make sure that they have got that designated space where they can work, so they're not mixing that work and personal time. You might want to make sure that they have got schedule and routine. So again, if they're working office hours but just from home, they might want to make sure you've still got that schedule of routine. They plan their day, they get up as they would do normally, and you get dressed in normal office clothing, which sometimes makes you feel like you are working. So making sure those systems and processes are in place. So as I said earlier, if you've got people in the office that are working on various projects and you need to update each other, have you got those systems and processes where people can access to see where those projects are up to? So people are keeping appraised of all the information that's happening that they're not seeing when they're working from home. The reward and praise, to make sure that you're providing that when there's jobs well done, and making sure, as I said earlier, they get that support. They know where to go for the support. If it's not the manager, if it's somebody else. And if you've got the new employees, and we talked about having a buddy system, is it their buddy that they go to? And also assessing those working arrangements. So is it working? Looking at what's working, what's not working, and making any adaptations to that if necessary. And then finally, the last slide here is what's the answer. So communication. Did I mention communication? I think I may have done. So communication is key, and we need to make sure that managers are trained to manage these people that are working remotely. Have you provided the right training for them and the right training for staff? Are your absence management policies and procedures up to date? And bearing in mind what Julie talked about earlier on, recording sickness absence, how you're going to do that, return to work, etc., where you've got people working remotely, and making sure they cover and the support is available for anybody showing signs of negative mental health. And do you have the mechanisms to refer to specialists or occupational health practitioners? It's so important not to shirk away from managing employees that have indicated that they might be stressed or anxious. making sure your policies show those mechanisms for support as well. And you might want to look at your appraisals and performance management policies as well that will cater for people that are working outside of the office. So I think that is probably my final slide.
Thank you very much, Helen. Can you hear me? I feel like I've gone super quiet. Yeah, good. So we do have a few questions, Julie and Helen. So from Steph, where does the company stand if we offer a limit of 2 days work from home, but someone requests 3 or 4 days based on the fact that they've been equally or more productive working from home over the past 12 months?
Shall I go first, Helen, and you can chip in? I mean, we are starting to see, as I'm sure Helen is, a similar trend where businesses, and it's great to see that businesses have already started to think about this, and I'm not at all surprised. An increasing trend towards employees wanting to kind of push the envelope, if I can put it like that. It's very difficult to second guess, I guess is the right expression, how an employment tribunal is going to deal with this, which is ultimately where these kind of issues might end up. But I mean, the first point I would make is, in my view, the way in which individuals have worked throughout the pandemic, yes, is obviously an indicative of how they can work in the future, but I am relatively confident that an employment tribunal won't necessarily be persuaded by that on the basis that it has been a legal requirement for employees to work from home where it is possible for that to have been achieved. Whereas once we move away from the pandemic, that requirement is not going to exist anymore. That said, I think the greater risk is from the allegations of discrimination, the raising of grievances, and the potential that employees might say, well, look, I've worked successfully for the past year at home, I've worked really productively, I have surpassed my targets, etc., etc., etc. And yet you as a business are saying, I can't work from home 3, 4, however many days it is because you have this policy. I think the key as a business, if you want to refuse that, is to go back to the points that both Emma and I, sorry, keep calling you Emma, Helen, I'm so sorry. Helen and I have both been talking about around collaboration, you know, supervision, etc., 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 and the extent to which that has been negatively impacted. And I mean, I'm relatively surprised at how quickly I am seeing a swing back. I mean, I was very much expecting employees to want to continue to work from home, but I am starting to see a swing very much back to actually the novelty perhaps has worn off a little bit. And, you know, I mean, I've adapted quite well to going back into the workplace. Not being interrupted by children as they walk in from school at 3:30, etc., etc., and then, you know, not having them screaming in the background. You know, it's just thinking about, yes, they've performed well, but what have we missed out on? Equally, you might say, well, actually, why shouldn't we agree to them continue to work 3, 4 days from home? But of course, then you've got the balance between needing people in the workplace, needing people at home, and how you bring those two together and how those patterns match up. It's not going to be easy, and employees are going to push back. I don't think I've directly answered the question, but they're my thoughts.
No, and I completely agree with what Julie said, but just be mindful, if you are setting those 2 days, what's your justification for the 2 days? Are there any reasons behind that, and why can't it be 3 or 4? So just being clear so you do avoid those discrimination issues.
Absolutely.
Got another question here about location where somebody lives. So if you've recruited them, they don't live locally. Any advice about where you stand with that?
I mean, well, I would guess that the fact that you've recruited them to work remotely and they are not local probably means that you're not going to be expecting them in the office or in the workplace 5 days a week. I mean, in those circumstances, again, it's thinking about when they would need to be in, how frequently, etc., etc. And you know, team meetings, that type of thing, you know, so that you can get the team together and you can sort of build that relationship. And you know, ultimately we are human beings after all, and we are social animals, and we like that interaction. And whilst we've all become very familiar with this type of thing, you know, we are missing out on certain elements of what, you know, what we would normally be able to experience. I mean, you can only see the top half, you know, sort of this bit of me, can't you? So you can't really see, except when I'm very, you know, whatever that word is, you know, you can't see my hands, you can't see my body language, and we're missing out on that. And that's, you know, a big part of how we communicate. And you know, I mean, we've had, within my team, I've had 2 people join us since during the pandemic, and you know, we Helen had joined, bless her, as we went into the second lockdown, so we'd been primed to be in the office, and actually between us we both said it would be of benefit to both of us, and we did. I think it was about 4 weeks in the office, and then she's transitioned to working from home, and Sarah is the same. You know, we've done that, and you know, we are now back in the office, three of us at any one point in time, because you know, you need to be able to overhear people in conversation, and you just can't do that over Teams. I can't have a conversation with a client who rings me and then say to whoever, just listen into this. It's just not how it works, and it's that experience that you learn and pick up through osmosis that we just haven't had over the past year and a bit.
Got a good question here. I don't know, Helen, you want to tackle this one, because you mentioned about the health and safety. So would you recommend a home visit to review the home environment if someone is planning to work from home for the majority of the week? Just thinking around the health and safety, potential claims and things like that, or could it just be form based for the individual to fill out themselves?
I think when I have spoken to health and safety people on this topic, they do recommend that you might want to visit the workplace, but I think I'd get them to do the DFE assessment first, and if you've got issues that you think on there, then it might be a good idea to visit. But again, that would probably be for a health and safety practitioner to answer, but I would certainly recommend it's quite a good idea to do that.
Yeah, Julie?
Yeah, I would agree. I think obviously, you know, businesses transition to home working very, very quickly, and you know, the kind of risk assessments, etc., have probably been, or might well have been, glossed over. And I think now, if that's going to be a longer term arrangement, then that certainly needs to be formalised. And as Helen mentioned, you know, there are issues around GDPR potentially, you know, making sure that things are confidential, etc., And I think as businesses, you need to, you know, assess that risk. And I think it would be very sensible for you to do, you know, not an on the spot kind of turn up on the doorstep and take the employee by surprise, but you know, arrange a visit with them and look at where they're working and look at their general, you know, wider working arrangements as well.
Yeah, Charlotte's just mentioned that their company have asked that they take a photograph, so as well of the space, I mean, that they're working.
Yeah, that's another way of doing it.
Common sense, yeah.
Or you can do a video call or something like that, but I think, you know, you always risk an employee, you know, ignoring a particular area of the room which might actually be of concern.
Yeah. If flexible working application is agreed and for business reasons this needs to be changed, is it through consultation with the employee that the agreement can be changed? Is there any risk?
Yeah, I mean, it would be through consultation. I mean, I would always recommend, and I noticed someone somewhere had said that they have an annual review on flexible arrangements, which is a very sensible approach to take. Some flexible arrangements will give the employee the right to make a change. Sorry, the employer to give the right to make a change if they need to. But of course, you know, you can implement that right or exercise that right. But if the employee isn't very happy to, you know, let's just say they work from home and there's a right for the employer to say, well, actually, you're going to have to come into the workplace now. Unless you bring the employee on that journey with you, you're going to have a pretty disgruntled employee, which isn't in anyone's interests. So whilst you might have a contractual right to make an amendment, I would always say, discuss it with them, explain why you want to make the change, take them on that journey and encourage them to agree it. Because yes, there is a risk. The worst case scenario is that they resign and bring a constructive unfair dismissal claim and or an allegation of discrimination. And that would be, as I say, worst case scenario.
Yeah, Nicola's commented that she's getting it's contractually in that they can make annual changes, but yeah, unions are getting involved.
Yeah. I mean, with home working and the flexible arrangements we've seen, you know, there is going to be a even greater degree of head to head, I think. You know, I mean, I'm seeing businesses as a matter of principle saying you must now return to the workplace because you know the legal requirement is no longer to work from home, purely and simply because that's what they're used to. And I mean, for me, that's a dangerous approach to take, both from a legal perspective, but also from a practical perspective, because ultimately, you know, you've got your employee body who are doing a job for you, and ultimately, you know, if one or more of those decide that the arrangements that you're putting in place for the future don't work for them, then you might find that those individuals start to go and work elsewhere, and then you might find the struggle to recruit because your arrangements aren't appealing as others.
Yeah,
and I think our final question is it a legal requirement to assess an employee working from home, or is it just best practice?
I think from a health and safety perspective, there's a legal requirement to carry out the risk assessment. Yeah. Yes.
Great.
Yeah, as an employer, you have a duty of health and safety to your employees wherever they are working, and if that workplace is their home, you are still legally responsible for that workplace. Doesn't mean, you know, the rest. You know, this is my workplace. I am in a room in my house. It doesn't mean that Birkett Long are responsible for the entirety of my house. It just means that they're responsible for how I'm sitting, etc., etc. Leave aside, I'm self-employed, but you know, as a matter of principle, you are responsible. So you absolutely do need to risk assess.
Yeah.
Do you only need to risk assess if it's over 50%, or is it any working from home you need to risk assess?
There's no magic number. It's I mean, if it's a case of you're working from home once every blue moon, then I would say no. If it's a more regular occurrence, then I would say yes. You as an employer have a duty to risk assess. Do you agree, Helen?
If they've got a station at home and they regularly work from home, I'd say yes. But if they're a salesperson on the road, that they're more or less in the office, they go out and see clients and they might catch up on emails for an hour in the evening, then I'd probably say no.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a duty of care there, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, ladies. I've put our contact details at the end, so feel free to take a screenshot. I will be sending all this out afterwards. Also, Helen and Julie and us as Mosaic regularly update our LinkedIn pages with upcoming events, news, topics that are coming up. Julie, you still doing your Wednesday webinar?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Julie does a regular Wednesday employment law update that's well worth attending. So follow her. I will also be sending out our contact details directly, and you'll have the option to sign up for Julie and Helen's regular newsletters as well. They'll just keep you updated. You've got our contact details as well if you've got anything on the recruitment side. And thank you. I hope it's been helpful, and any feedback could be very much appreciated. Anything else from Helen and Julie?
No, just thank you for attending, and I hope you found it very useful. So thank you very
Great.
much.